when it's a leap year. Now that's a lot for a mechanical watch to do. When we talk about the Patek Philippe Perpetual Calendar.
아하, 안녕하십니까. 매일매일 운동하기를 실천하고 있는 동탄 왕콩입니다. 오늘은 3월 18일 목요일. 네, 그렇습니다. 운동해야지. 오늘 조금 피곤하네요. 쉬는 날까지 아직 이틀 더, 금요일, 토요일 2일 더 출근해야 됩니다. 와, 지금 CNN에서 스노클링이 나오는데, 진짜 너무, 솔직히 우리나라에서는 스노클링을 진짜 해외처럼 할 수 있는 곳이 없죠. 진짜 우리나라도 뭐 제주도도 이쁘다 하는데, 해외를 안 나가본 사람들이 그런 소리를 하는 거 아니겠습니까? 우물안 개구리죠, 우물안 개구리. 오늘 좀 스트레칭 조금 하고 팔굽혀펴기만 좀 주로 하면서 조금 운동하겠습니다. 조금. 두통이 살짝, 역시 이렇게 컨디션이 안 좋을 때는 무조건 여러분 잠을 자는 게 짱입니다. 오늘도 10시 안에 잠들도록 할게요.
At this point in time, domestic violent extremism, the lone wolf, the loose affiliation of individuals following ideologies of hate and other ideologies of extremism that are willing and able to take those ideologies and execute on them in unlawful, illegal, violent ways is our greatest threat in the homeland right now.
Domestic violent extremism, the greatest threat in the homeland right now. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas warning lawmakers about that threat. And this comes as a new intelligence report states that election fraud claims will almost certainly spur more violence. Joining us now, CNN political analyst Min Kim. She is a White House reporter for the Washington Post. Something as we look at this intel report, it specifically points out narratives of fraud in the recent general election, the emboldening impact of the violent breach of the U.S. Capitol, conditions related to the pandemic, and conspiracy theories promoting violence. In some ways, it's not a surprise, but to see it there, I just wonder, is there a sense in Washington of what the impact will be of this report?
Well, certainly there's a couple of things. First of all, it underscores just how important it is for lawmakers, Democratic and Republican, to tell voters, to tell the public that there was no systemic fraud in the election and try to stamp out that claim as much as possible. But clearly something that many in the Republican Party have been resistant to do. But I think another impact of this report is that it really is going to reignite again this debate over how to properly and fully investigate that January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. Because what we're seeing right now is a little bit concerning, that as the further that we get from January 6th and the impact that had on the Capitol, the more and more it seems that lawmakers are kind of going to their partisan corners and arguing, for example, over the scope of this 9/11 style commission that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has proposed, but frankly has gone nowhere so far in the Capitol over, the disputes about the scope of the commission and the partisan balance of the commission. So I think maybe what this report does is kind of reset everyone. Maybe it brings lawmakers together to try to, figure out a path forward to investigate the insurrection, but we'll definitely be gauging the impact of that later today.
So Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader, has an op-ed in the Washington Post today where he basically warns against doing away with the filibuster. No one loves a good filibuster discussion more than I do, or you do probably, but we're like that. So I want to actually ask this in a way that I think people will think is more important or relating to their lives. The question is, to change the Senate rules to make it easier for Democrats to pass their legislation. As we sit here this morning, how far do you think Democrats are willing to push this notion? Do you think this is something that they will fight for over the coming months?
It's certainly something that some Democrats will fight for over the next several months. But the problem for Democrats in changing these long-standing filibuster rules are, frankly, other Democrats themselves. And it's not just the people that we hear over and over. For example, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who has been so vocal in his support for keeping the Senate the way it is, virtually intact, as well as Kirsten Sinema. I've talked to some aides, and obviously we've talked to a lot of senators who are, much more than just those two, perhaps at least a half a dozen, even more, who are really nervous about changing the filibuster rules for many reasons. And I think one point that McConnell has made over the last several days, and one that certainly some veteran Democrats are afraid of, is what Republicans would do with that power, with the lack of a filibuster, if and when they regain power in the Senate and in the White House. Because we know politics is cyclical. Democrats are not going to be in power forever. The Senate is 50-50, and Republicans could win back the majority as soon as then. So if the filibuster is eliminated, what happens to issues such as, for example, limiting abortion that Republicans have wanted to do? And that's certainly a question and a concern in some Democrats' minds. And that is an obstacle that these proponents of changing the filibuster will have to make on their own Democratic colleagues.
And that's specifically, of course, what Mitch McConnell is laying out, right, in that op-ed. Here's exactly what we could do. Really quickly, in response to the horrific shootings in Atlanta, former President Obama was tweeting about, gun reform, and perhaps this is something that may finally spur some action. I'm not sure that this is the action that will spur, but if gun reform isn't it, do you think it will, at a minimum, hopefully, raise more awareness and perhaps action when it comes to anti-Asian hate?
I think, you raise a really interesting point, because that was a lot of the political reaction that we saw yesterday. Time and time again, after these mass shootings and these tragedies, we see these renewed calls for gun control and gun overhaul legislation. And we didn't see that too much yesterday, aside from former President Obama. The focus from Democratic lawmakers was calling out anti-Asian rhetoric, even as law enforcement officials continue to assess what really drove, what was the motive for the shooter. Democrats are pointing to the rhetoric by the former president that they say really drove this rise of anti-Asian harassment and violence in the last year. There's going to be a really important hearing later today in the House Judiciary Committee at 10 a.m. on discrimination and harassment in the Asian American community. So certainly Democrats are trying to bring more of a light to this very important issue.
Seungmin Kim, thank you, as always, for being with us this morning.
Tensions rising between the U.S. and Russia. The Russian ambassador recalled after President Biden calls Vladimir Putin a killer. Now Russian leaders are calling out the new U.S. president. We are live in Moscow. Next.
The Keepers. Preserving Japan's most treasured crafts, history comes alive with the delicate taste of sweetness, pulsating sounds throughout the nation, and mesmerizing one-of-a-kind designs.
I see expressions that I could never have even imagined.
Travel across Japan for stories of artisans passing on their legacy to the next generation. The Keepers, Saturday on CNN.
500,000 people now lost to the coronavirus.
Join CNN for an emotional journey
My heart broke.
of loss
My dad was someone.
and survival. The human cost of COVID, Sunday on CNN.
Have you been bitten by the bug of curiosity? This is CNN 10. My name is Carl Azus. I'll be your explainer-in-chief.
Global news.
International relations are the key factors.
Relevant stories.
Everyday people whose action is changing their community.
Complex issues. Explained.
We're going back to the future.
And 10-second trivia.
You get a perfect 10 out of 10.
All in 10 minutes. Stream at youtube.com/CNN10. Connect the World with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. Real news that shapes our world. Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. It all starts here. And that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the World with Becky Anderson. Tonight on CNN.
I'm Marwa Damon in Idlib, Syria. This is CNN.
So major developments this morning in the U.S. relationship with Russia. Russia has recalled its ambassador to the United States for consultations after President Biden said this about Russia's interference in the 2020 election.
He will pay a price. We had a long talk, he and I. I know him relatively well. And the conversation started off, I said, I know you and you know me. If I establish this occurred, then be prepared.
So you know Vladimir Putin, you think he's a killer?
Mm-hmm, I do.
So what price must he pay?
The price he's going to pay, well, you'll see shortly.
The I do think he is a killer is now the subject of a serious diplomatic back and forth between the new nations. Russia speaking out over just the last few minutes. Seen as Matthew Chance live in Moscow. Matthew, what's the very latest?
Well, John, the Kremlin is not happy at all with those remarks and that grunt by President Biden saying that he thinks that President Putin of Russia is a killer. This is what the Kremlin spokesman had to say about it just a few minutes ago. He said, these are very bad statements by the President of the United States. He definitely does not want to improve relations with us, and we will continue to proceed from this point. So quite tough words there. From the Kremlin spokesman, Vladimir Putin's spokesman, has been accompanied with actions as well, because last night, as you mentioned, Russia recalled the ambassador to the United States, a move that hasn't been taken in decades. They've brought him back, or bringing him back to Moscow for consultations about, according to my sources,
한국 표현이 마지막으로 10개만 하고
comments, but also about the whole range
끝내도록
of strains
하겠습니다.
and issues in that fraught relationship with the United States. They want to decide, we're told, how to proceed, how to get the relationship with the US back on the correct footing, or on a better footing, because of course there are sanctions against Russia from the United States and other countries as well. They are crippling the Russian economy. They know there are more sanctions on their way, and the big concern in Moscow right now is that this situation is spiraling downwards. What are they going to do to try and get those sanctions alleviated, John?
I tell you, it's crystal clear by the actions of the Kremlin that they noticed a change in tone coming from the U.S. administration. I mean, these are actions that were not taken over the last 4 years, or words from the U.S. administration they hadn't heard in the last 4 years. So we will watch this very closely over the next several hours. Matthew Chance, thank you.
A historic find by archaeologists in Israel. New pieces of a Dead Sea Scroll, 1,900 years old. That discovery shedding new light on our ancient past. CNN's Hadassah has more.
It's the most amazing thing I encountered, I've seen in my life.
In these remote caves near the Dead Sea, Israeli researchers